The sun hung low over the horizon, casting a warm golden hue across the endless expanse of the ancient coastal savanna. In the distance, jagged cliffs rose steeply from the earth, their weathered faces standing tall against the mighty ocean winds. Waves crashed relentlessly against the rocky shore, sending sprays of salty mist into the air. Beneath the cliffs, nestled within the shadows of caves, a small tribe of Homo habilis found shelter their lives, bound by the rhythms of the sea and the unforgiving land that surrounded them. The tribe moved in quiet unity, their movements swift but cautious. They knew this land well, its hidden dangers, its fleeting resources, but they also understood the promise of survival. The caves, their sanctuary, protected them from the wild forces of nature, but it was their resourcefulness that kept them alive. Fire burned brightly in the center of their encampment, crackling and popping as it kept the darkness at bay. The scent of roasted fish filled the air, mingling with the earthy aroma of the herbs they had gathered. But as the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows over the rocky coast, a sense of unease settled over the tribe. They had learned to rely on the sea for sustenance, but the ocean was not always kind. Storms rolled in, unexpectedly dark clouds gathering on the horizon, the wind picking up, carrying the promise of something more dangerous. The young leader of the tribe, his face hardened by the elements, stood at the mouth of the cave, his sharp eyes scanning the waves. His instincts told him something was coming, something he could not yet see. But he felt it like a storm brewing in his bones. Suddenly, a loud crack pierced the air, followed by the distant sound of howling winds. The sky darkened even further, the clouds swirling ominously. A great storm was approaching, one that could wash away everything they had worked so hard to build. The leader turned swiftly, rallying his people with a series of sharp gestures. The fire must be protected, the children must be hidden, and the women must gather what they could carry. But it was the men who would face the storm head-on, those who had trained their bodies to survive the wildest of nature's forces. As the storm approached, the waves grew larger, crashing violently against the cliffs. The sound of the ocean became deafening, and the wind howled like a wild beast, whipping through the trees and rattling the branches. The tribe huddled together, their faces grim but determined. They had weathered countless storms before, but never one like this. It was as if the very earth itself was rebelling against their existence, as if the ocean sought to swallow them whole. The leader's eyes narrowed as he watched the sky, his gaze unwavering. He knew that survival was not just about surviving the storm. It was about surviving together. The storm would pass, but the challenges they faced would not be so easily overcome. With a deep breath, he turned back to his people and signaled for them to move. The caves were secure for now, but they had to prepare for the worst. The men would guard the entrances while the women and children moved deeper into the shelter. This was no ordinary storm. This was a trial of survival, one that would test not just their physical endurance, but their unity and resolve as a tribe. The tension in the air was palpable, every movement, every gesture infused with urgency. The storm had not yet arrived, but it loomed large in their minds. They knew that life on the coast was fragile, that they were always one step away from disaster. But they also knew that together they could endure anything. As the storm's winds howled louder, the coastal caves became their last bastion of safety. The entrance was narrow, guarded fiercely by the men who braced themselves for the worst. The howling winds whipped through the caves, carrying with them the scent of salt and the roar of the ocean, as if nature itself was warning them. The leader stood firm, his face set in determination. He knew that the storm might be fierce, but what lay beyond the immediate threat was far more dangerous rival tribes who had been known to raid during such moments of chaos. The women and children huddled in the deeper recesses of the cave, the firelight flickering against the walls, casting long, dancing shadows. The crackling flames were a stark contrast to the turmoil outside, providing warmth, comfort, and a small sense of security. But the shadows on the walls grew longer, and the uneasy murmur of the tribe's elders filled the air. They had seen storms like this before, but this one felt different. One of the hunters, a young man barely out of his adolescence, stood near the edge of the cave, his eyes glued to the distance. The crashing of the waves seemed to grow louder, more violent. In the midst of the howling winds, he could hear a faint noise, shuffling, a soft scrape of stone against stone, the rustling of a figure in the shadows. He could feel his pulse quicken. It wasn't just the storm he was concerned about. There was something else lurking just beyond the cave's entrance. He signaled to the leader, who immediately strode forward, his powerful movements purposeful and sure. The storm had yet to reach its peak, but something was about to happen. The sound of approaching footsteps echoed in the cave's narrow passageways. Their once peaceful coastal home was now a battleground, and the challenge of survival was no longer just about weathering the storm. It was about defending their very existence. Suddenly, there was a rustling from outside the cave. The group froze. It was too quiet for comfort, the kind of quiet that preceded danger. A shadow passed before the cave entrance, and then another. They were being watched. The leader, motioning with his hands, directed the men to form a defensive line. The young hunter, his spear in hand, stood poised. Every muscle in his body was taut, ready to spring into action. His heart raced in his chest, but he had no time for fear. The survival of the tribe depended on their ability to act swiftly and decisively. The storm continued to rage outside, but it was no longer the greatest threat. The rival tribe had arrived. They had taken advantage of the storm's chaos to approach undetected, their intentions clear. They would take what they could from the tribe, and if necessary, they would kill to do so. The leader's face hardened as he surveyed the approaching threat. These were not strangers to him, but enemies who had long sought to claim this coastal territory. The storm was but a prelude to the true test of survival. And now it was time to fight. Without warning, a shout rang out, and the rival tribe burst from the shadows. Spears clashed in the air, the sound of metal on stone filling the cave. The young hunter was the first to react, launching himself at the nearest enemy. His spear thrusting forward with practiced precision. A moment of chaos erupted, screams, grunts, the clash of weapons. The tribe's defensive line was holding, but the battle was far from over. The leader's voice cut through the storm, shouting commands to rally the others. The caves, once a safe haven, had become a battlefield. The tribe fought with everything they had: stone tools, brute strength, and the unyielding will to survive. In the heat of the battle, the storm outside seemed to fade into the background, replaced by the fierce struggle for survival that raged within. As the hours passed, the tribe's fighters began to wear down, but their resolve never faltered. Every inch of ground was contested. Yet the tide slowly began to turn. The rival tribes, seeing the strength and unity of the defenders, hesitated. They had underestimated the power of this tribe's survival instincts. The leader of the rival tribe, recognizing that victory was slipping through his fingers, signaled for retreat. With a final defiant shout, the enemies withdrew, their dark silhouettes disappearing into the storm. The coast battered by the winds, and the battle was still theirs. The tribe stood victorious, though battered and bruised. They had survived together. The storm outside began to subside, and the winds, once fierce, started to die down. The sky, once filled with dark clouds, began to clear, revealing the first light of dawn. The storm was over, but the trials of survival were far from finished. The leader looked to the horizon, his eyes filled with resolve. Their coastal caves were safe for now, but the world was unpredictable, and the next storm, be it natural or man-made, was always on the horizon. The tribe had learned something vital. Survival was not just about strength or skill. It was about unity, the willingness to protect one another no matter the cost. As the tribe gathered around the fire, sharing a meal of roasted fish and wild herbs, the weight of the battle slowly lifted. The laughter of the children, the quiet murmurs of the elders, and the warmth of the fire filled the cave, signaling that life would continue. The storm had passed, and they had survived. For now, that was enough.